And we're starting off the list with a pretty amazing civilization, the Indus. They existed from around 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. It's often called one of the world's oldest civilizations, but they were pretty advanced. They had sanitation systems that wouldn't be matched until the Roman times, which is pretty crazy. They had busy cities with well-planned streets, houses, and even indoor bathrooms, apparently. Two major cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, are probably the most well-known. These cities had intricate brickwork, drainage systems, and there's evidence of a written script that we haven't even been able to fully decipher to this day. These folks were not just good at city building, they were also savvy traders. The Indus people traded with Mesopotamia, using boats to transport goods. Agriculture was a big deal too, with well-irrigated fields for growing crops. But around 1300 BCE, the civilization started to fall off. We're not entirely sure why. Some think it could be due to climate change affecting their water sources, so people up and left migrating southeast. Today, all that's left of the ancient city of Angkor in Cambodia is Angkor Wat, this beautiful temple complex, which also happens to be the largest religious structure in the entire world. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and as large as it is, it's still only just one part of a city that used to be larger than modern-day New York City. Angkor, the capital of the Khmer Empire. This place had magnificent temples, including Angkor Wat, so you can only imagine how many more amazing structures there were, considering how vast this place was. But around the 15th century, the city declined and was eventually abandoned. There may have been environmental stress here. The complex irrigation system may have strained resources, causing soil depletion and impacting food production. There could have also been prolonged droughts that affected their ability to support a large population. Researchers aren't exactly sure how many people lived there, of course, but considering the size, there were probably a lot. And there were also power struggles and invasions, which weakened the Khmer Empire, eventually leading to the decline of their largest city, followed by the empire itself about 300 years later. This next civilization was also pretty incredible, but things didn't end quite as smoothly for them as the first point on this list. Rather than people just moving and settling somewhere else because of issues with agriculture, it looks like things ended pretty violently for the Anasazi. The Anasazi were an ancient Native American people who lived in the Four Corners region of the United States, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. They were skilled builders, creating these impressive homes that were carved into the sides of cliffs. These dwellings were kind of like the skyscrapers of their time. They towered over everything else in the region until the 1880s, when actual skyscrapers came into play. But for as advanced as they were, things did not end well. The theory is that they were dealing with a long-term drought, and deforestation was happening too. They were using up a lot of wood, probably for building and cooking. Add water management issues to the mix, and it's easy to see why things started to fall apart. Tensions rose due to desperation, and that's what likely led to violent conflicts. And by around 1300 AD, the Anasazi had mostly dispersed. Next on the list, we have the Rapanui civilization on Easter Island. This is the island with all those amazing stone statues known as moai. The fact that they were able to carve these things out of volcanoes and then transport the 14-ton behemoths around the island is a pretty incredible feat. For a long time, it was a complete mystery as to how they actually did it, but it turns out they would have used a system of ropes with a team pulling the statues back and forth, making the moai kind of like walk. It's pretty cool. So what went wrong with the Rapanui? Well, scientists dug into the dirt, looking at ancient charcoal pieces and pollen in the soil, found that the Rapanui had chopped down almost every tree on the island. Then rats on the island were eating the tree seeds before new trees could grow, so the forest was completely wiped out. Without trees, the people lost their ability to make rope and canoes, and apparently they started burning grass to make fire. This was all pretty bad, and you can bet tensions were high, and things would have gotten even worse when Europeans showed up in 1722. The first Europeans to set foot on Easter Island, they did their thing. They didn't come in peace. It's about as classic as it gets, unfortunately. And if that wasn't enough, by the 1870s, waves of smallpox and a major Peruvian slave raid hit the Rapanui, and these were the last nails in the coffin for the already small population on the island. Next up are the Mississippians. The Mississippians were a group of Native American societies that thrived in the southeastern United States from around 800 to 1600 AD. They were known for building these complex societies with impressive mounds, and Cahokia was one of their biggest and most impressive cities. This place, located near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico. At its peak, it had a population of around 20,000 people, possibly even double that. It had enormous earthen mounds, including the famous Monk's Mound, which is still one of the largest man-made earthen mounds in North America, but it eventually fell. Around the late 13th century, the population began to dwindle, and by the 14th century, the city was largely abandoned. Nature slowly reclaimed the area. It's not very clear what led to the decline. There aren't explicit records from that time, but it was probably a combination of things, environmental and economic. Next on the list are the people of the Nabta Playa. So Nabta Playa is a dry lake bed located in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt. It has these archaeological remains dating back to around 10,000 to 6,000 years ago during the Neolithic period. The people who once lived here left behind evidence of their advanced understanding of astronomy and agriculture. They erected a stone circle kind of similar to the Stonehenge in England, which seems to be what they used to map the stars. Some archaeologists think these stone formations worked as an ancient kind of calendar, but other than the stone circles they left behind, we really don't know a whole lot about the people of Nabta Playa. Archaeologists and historians are still trying to piece together their daily lives, social structures, and what ultimately happened to them. The site seems to have been abandoned around 5,000 years ago, but the lack of written records from that time period makes it tough to pinpoint the exact reasons behind their disappearance. Next up, we have Catalhoyuk. Catalhoyuk in central Turkey is not only one of the first known urban settlements in the world, but also one of the strangest. So instead of streets like you have with most cities, every city, here all the homes and buildings were connected, and to get around, people walked along the paths on roofs and then descended down into their homes with ladders. Looking at images of the place, it looks almost like a big ginormous honeycomb type of formation. It's very unique. There aren't really any places like it. There were also no cemeteries. Residents buried their dead underneath their own homes. The fate of its inhabitants is still mysterious, which isn't surprising considering how ancient it is. But around 6700 BCE, the site was abandoned, and researchers are still piecing together the reasons behind it. The ancient city of Thonis, which now sits at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. I love ancient underwater cities. There's just something so beautiful but eerie about them at the same time. So Thonis was an Egyptian city located near the mouth of the Nile River. It was one of the most important port cities in ancient Egypt, a thriving port city during the time of the pharaohs, a center for trade with Greece and other Mediterranean countries, and it played a big role in the Egyptian economy. The city had these grand temples and statues dedicated to the various gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt, but then it sank. There were probably natural disasters like earthquakes, and of course the sea levels rose, and for centuries this place was lost and forgotten until underwater archaeologists discovered its ruins in 2000, with divers finding well-preserved artifacts like statues, pottery, and religious objects. Alright, we gotta talk about it. The lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis was a legendary city first mentioned by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, and according to Plato, Atlantis was this powerful and advanced civilization that existed around 9,000 years before his own time. So that's about 11,000 years ago from today. But it's still a complete mystery as to whether or not this place really did exist. A lot of uppity scientists say it didn't, but they also sound very not fun. It's said that Atlantis had a sophisticated government, advanced technology, and a prosperous economy. The Atlanteans were described as this powerful, warlike people who eventually became corrupt and decadent, leading the gods to punish them by submerging their island beneath the sea in a single day and night. The exact location of Atlantis is still unknown, and there are a lot of archaeologists that figure Atlantis, the whole story behind it, was really just a legend and an allegory rather than an actual place. Some of the rumored locations, though, range from the Mediterranean to Antarctica, but there's never been any definitive physical evidence of its existence. And finally, of course, we have the Maya, who created some of the most incredible architecture and artwork of any known ancient civilization. And not only were their cities and artwork spectacular, but their knowledge about astronomy was unparalleled for the time. But around the 9th and 10th centuries, their cities, which once bustled with life, started to empty out, and that's always been a mystery as to why. It's hard to pinpoint an exact cause because parts of the civilization fell at various times. It was a wide-stretching civilization with various languages and practices across the board, but there are some ideas as to what happened. Environmental stress is usually a big factor. Could have been droughts or crop failures. Another thing could be overpopulation. Resources could have started running thin, and when there's overpopulation, there's more violence. Not a great recipe for a peaceful society. There might have been some political problems as well, with rulers losing control, causing internal conflicts.
Kicking off our list at number 10. Athens, Greece. Of course, Athens is the largest city in Greece, and of course, if the Olympics are any indication, Athens is quite old. It's been around for a while. People have been hucking javelins for quite a few years. One of the oldest cities in the world, being inhabited for around 7,000 years. Yeah, not bad. It was once a powerful city-state and the birthplace of democracy, which is a little less exciting than the Olympics, but still rather cool. Exploring the city today can be quite exciting. Some ancient cities are in rough areas of the world, but to visit Greece, learn about ancient democracy and ancient Olympics, then go swim in beautiful water, it's amazing. It's the best trip ever. Ancient empires like the Romans, Byzantine, and the Ottomans, they also settled in this ancient city as well, so a lot of history to go around. Ancient Greeks also used to work out naked. That's just a fun fact that I wanted to share with the world. The word gymnasium translates to the Greek term gymnasion, which meant school for naked exercise. So I ask, what would you prefer? Xavier's school for gifted youngsters or Nico's school for naked exercise? It's 50-50. Number 9. Rayy, Iran. Rayy is the oldest city in the province and one of the oldest cities on the planet, with evidence of inhabitants going back as far as 6,000 BC. It's like 8,000 years ago. I can't even fathom that. The Avesta are these ancient scriptures of Zoroastrianism. Now, Arabs took control of the city in 641 AD, and it was almost destroyed by the Mongols later in 1220. Now, somehow, after all of that, there's still historical monuments that still stand to this day. And that includes the 12th century Tigral Tower and an excavation site where 7,000-year-old artifacts were initially discovered. That's so old. Number 8. Faiyum, Egypt. We kicked our list off with ancient Greece, so it's only a matter of time before we get into some ancient Egyptian goodness. The oldest city in Egypt, and one of the oldest in Africa, is the city Faiyum. Faiyum was founded around 4000 BC, and it's located 62 miles southwest of Cairo. Now, Faiyum is in a historical spot. It's located in an area that was once the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, whose inhabitants once worshipped a sacred crocodile named Pashukos. How amazing is that? I feel like the pyramids and the tombs in Cairo are all the talk, but Faiyum? It's an ancient relic. Go there instead. Today, the Faiyum is home to markets, mosques, and baths. Worth a visit if you're doing a big trip. Don't forget about sacred crocodiles when planning your itinerary. Pyramids, then crocodiles. 1, 2, boom. Number 7. Helike, Turkey. According to Greek legend, Helike was a place that was destroyed by Poseidon himself, aka the god of the sea, storms, earthquakes, and horses. See, what happened was he was upset because those who resided in Helike were refusing to give their statue of Poseidon, or even a copy of it, to the Ionian colonists in Asia Minor, which is now modern-day Turkey. Our modern archaeology, along with ancient sources, have been able to deduce that an earthquake in 373 BC caused the ground beneath the entire city to completely liquefy, which is Well, that's horrifying. And then from here on, a tsunami then hit and totally engulfed the city, and it's said that this all happened in the span of 1 or 2 hours, which sadly left no survivors. In the 1980s and 1990s, under the direction of archaeologist Dora Katsanapopoulos and physicist Stephen Suter, a more accurate location of where Helike may be came to light in 2001, and the ancient city was finally located. Number 6. Caral, Peru. An American history professor named Paul Cossack was absolutely fascinated by ancient settlements, as many of us are. But this passion led him to devoting much of his time to studying in Peru, which has, well, such an incredibly rich history already. In 1948, while in Peru, Paul made the discovery that he's been waiting for his entire life. He came across the dry remains of an ancient city. The remains were carbon dated and placed back to around 5,000 years old. The city of Caral was once home to around 3,000 inhabitants pre-Inca. This was already a thriving location while the pyramids were being built. That's how old the settlement is. It appeared to be quite a peaceful place as there were no obvious signs of battles or weapons, but among the remains were homes, plazas, temples, and an amphitheater, so pretty nice stuff, all things considered. It's said the city was abandoned in 2000 BC, and in 2009 AD, it was made a World Heritage Site. Number 5. Machu Picchu, Peru. For this one, we have another one of the most famous and well-known lost cities, Machu Picchu. This site was built over 500 years ago, and it was once known as the lost city of the Inca until the modern discovery of it in 1911 by archaeologist Hiram Bingham changed the game. Him and his team actually stumbled upon an ancient city almost accidentally. They were looking for another ancient city, and then they found another one. That's kind of a win. I don't know, or a loss? Not really sure. Machu Picchu was built by the incredible Incas who have surprised us in our modern times. Many times with their unbelievable technology or abilities that they had all those years ago, somehow we're still uncovering secrets. It's believed that this place may have been built for the Inca emperor as a sort of estate almost. See, Machu Picchu was built in 1450, but it was abandoned about a century later at the time of the Spanish conquest. And as of 2007, it has been voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world, and work continues to be done on it to maintain and restore this wonderful location. Number 4. Pompeii, Italy. One of the most famous lost cities of all time, the Roman city of Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 AD when the eruption of Mount Vesuvius just went off, and then volcanic ash was then strewn about the city. It's horrible. It's one of the worst things I can think of. Fast forward all the way to 1748 when the Duke of Naples had a summer palace built just 24 kilometers south of Naples on Italy's west coast. Through the construction, as those working on the palace began to dig, they started to come across buildings and streets, and from here on, once news spread, people began to flock into the area, and it was realized what had been uncovered was a lost city, the lost city of Pompeii. Again, you just find an entire city, like, hey, I found a road under here. What's this about? Fascinating. Throughout the Victorian times, people would come and see as more of this town was uncovered, and eventually they found an amphitheater, a forum, houses, and shops. Everything you'd expect a town to have, really. This one was just, covered in hot lava, so untouched for a little bit. Number 3. Skara Brae. This is an area that is located in Scotland, and it was found in an exceptionally surprising way. In 1850, there was this huge storm that hit Scotland, and it was so bad that around 200 people passed away from it. It was terrible. Now, the next day, however, once the storm had eventually passed, residents of the Orkney Isles began to notice that part of a cliff had dislodged, but it uncovered a sort of hidden settlement almost, which is insane. It's like some Zelda temple. We're like, what is this in this isle? Tests were able to date this site back from 3200 BC to 2200 BC, and it was shown to have been inhabited for around 600 years. There were round stone homes there, and the roofs were made of whalebone and peat. It was pretty creative. The design of this little city suggested that there wasn't a hierarchy, but rather a group of people living peacefully as farmers, or herdsmen, or traders, or anything not involving battle. You know what I mean? While the site is small, it's pretty mighty. The houses are in quite great shape for the amount of time that has passed. This little settlement in Europe is the most complete Neolithic village, and while it's older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids, it's been called the Scottish Pompeii because of how well preserved it is. Number 2. Sigiriya. In 1831, it is said that Major Jonathan Forbes of the 78th Highlanders of the British Army was on horseback, and on his way back from a journey, that's when he spotted the bush-covered summit of Sigiriya. In the 1890s, archaeological work slowly began on the site, but Harry Charles Purvis Bell, way too long of a name, was really the person who began to start large-scale work on this area. The Cultural Triangle Project, which was launched by the government of Sri Lanka, began to really focus their attention on Sigiriya in 1982, and for the first time, archaeological work began on the entire city. It took a little while, but we got there. Basically, the city consists of an ancient citadel that was built by King Kashyapa in the 5th century. There's an upper palace on the top of the rock and a mid-level terraces. There are moats and walls and gardens that extend out from the base of the rock as well. The location once served as a palace and fortress, but it was abandoned after the king's death. And finally, number 1, Mohenjo-Daro. This is a location whose name is said to roughly translate to a mound of the dead's men. This is one of the world's oldest urban settlements, as it was found and built somewhere around 2600 to 2500 BC, in what is now Pakistan. But it was abandoned as the civilization that called this place home declined. For almost 4,000 years, this site was seemingly forgotten about and the remains of it were undocumented until an officer of the Archaeological Survey of India, R.D. Banerjee, visited the site in 1920 and found a flint scraper, which then convinced him of the site's rich history. And from here, excavations of the site began, and as the 1980s kicked off, it was named a World Heritage Site, officially.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Olmec civilization. The Olmec civilization has often been referred to as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and from somewhere between 1400 to 400 BC, the civilization rose in the Mexican Gulf Coast. The name Olmec came because they lived in the Olmen, the land of rubber. The Olmec civilization was thriving and advanced, and they too had their own mysterious stone structures known as the Olmec colossal heads. They even were able to successfully build aqueducts, which is an amazing feat for the time period. The civilization, however, started to see its decline around 400 BC. During this time, two of their major cities were just abandoned, which is very mysterious and of course super strange. They left behind everything, their buildings and structures, artifacts and statues. They just seemingly picked up and left. There isn't much left to go on, to be totally honest, but experts believe that some sort of natural disaster might have been a cause for the disappearance. Something like a drought or an eruption could have wreaked havoc on their food supply. There is also the possibility of conflict between them and other civilizations in the area. At the end of the day, exactly what happened here remains quite a mystery, with only the remains of the civilization left to look at for clues. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Ancestral Puebloans. This group, who were a culture of indigenous Americans, built their lives in what is now referred to as the Four Corners region of the United States. This area now consists of southeastern Utah, northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and southwestern Colorado. This group was able to create beautiful stone homes into the side of cliffs during the 12th and 13th centuries. When I tell you that the level of skill and work this took was incredible, it really was. Some of these places would have hundreds of rooms, and they were the tallest buildings in the United States until the creation of skyscrapers in the late 1800s. That is absolutely wild. Unfortunately, these works of arts wouldn't be lived in for long, as the civilization met a rapid and violent decline. Many experts will point to religious and political conflict as a contributing factor to the decline of this civilization, but no one is totally clear. What we do know is that there have been discoveries in the area that point to violence, human consumption, water management problems exacerbated by a drought, just a lot of bad stuff that clearly shows the ending was an incredibly tough time for the people going through it. In the end, this all led to many of these people having to abandon their homes and flee south. While this settlement collapsed, it doesn't mean that the culture or the people were entirely gone. Many modern-day descendants of this civilization include the Hopi and the Zuni peoples. In our number 8 spot today, we have Cahokia. This settlement was established somewhere around 1,200 years ago, and it was a river valley community located near what is now St. Louis, Missouri in the United States. This is actually quite an incredible settlement because it was the largest north of Mexico at the time, with a population of around 20,000 people. The city had things like buildings, plazas, and one of the things that they were most known for was these massive mounds. The largest was known as the Monk's Mound, and it was 100 feet tall. The location of this settlement proved to be amazing for a while. Its spot near several rivers made it the perfect trading location. This was all great and ideal until it really wasn't. Experts believe that somewhere around 1200 AD, the population was wiped out by a massive flood that hit the area. Some wondered if the flood only contributed to an already dwindling civilization because they believed that perhaps resources in the area were quickly disappearing, or maybe they had been hit by disease. Others believed that the flood was the first massive event, but that perhaps it was followed by a little ice age that only sealed the fate. In our number 4 spot today, we have Gobekli Tepe. This is a pre-pottery Neolithic archaeological site that is located in Turkey. This site has been dated all the way back to somewhere from 9,500 to 8,000 BC, making it the world's oldest known megaliths, which truly is just incredible. This site is comprised of a bunch of large circular structures that are being supported by massive stone pillars, many of which are decorated with abstract, anthropomorphic details, and things which have provided very rare and very valuable insight into prehistoric religion and the iconography of the times when it was built. One of the most amazing things about this area is that it was first used at the beginning of the Neolithic period, which marks the oldest human settlements anywhere in the world. It has been called the world's first temple, and it was used by groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers from a wide area. Here's what makes this so remarkably interesting though. Despite what I said earlier, this place is not a settlement and instead was used by many people. The site was essentially built by Stone Age humans who came from about a 200-kilometer radius around the site. It isn't quite clear why they stopped using it, but what is clear is that without a doubt, this was one of the best archaeological finds our modern society has ever had, as it gives us just a glimpse into what life was like in prehistoric times, and it totally changes what we once thought about the timeline of our history. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Skara Brae. This is an area that is located in Scotland, and it was found in an exceptionally surprising way. In 1850, there was a huge storm that hit Scotland, and it was so bad that around 200 people passed away from it. The next day, however, once the storm had passed, residents of the Orkney Isles began to notice that part of a cliff had dislodged, but it uncovered a sort of hidden settlement. Tests were able to date this site back from 3200 BC to 2200 BC, and it was shown to have been inhabited for about 600 years. There were round stone homes here, and the roofs were made out of whalebone and peat, and the design of this little city suggested that there wasn't a hierarchy, but rather a group of people living peacefully as farmers, herdsmen, and traders. While the site is small, the houses are in quite great shape for the amount of time it's been. This little settlement is Europe's most complete Neolithic village, and while it is older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids, it's been called the Scottish Pompeii because of how well preserved it is. No one is exactly sure why the residents of this village abandoned it, but it is likely that a change in climate is somewhat, if not fully, responsible, and a storm might have been the reason those living here had to leave in haste, which is deduced by how all of their belongings were left behind.
And we're starting off the list with the Anjikuni village incident. This incident went down in November of 1930. Up in the northern wilds of Canada, a fur trapper was set to make a stop at the Anjikuni Inuit village to trade furs. But when he arrived, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The whole place was deserted, not a soul around. The trapper claimed that the food supplies were still there, but the people were gone. He went to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they sent a detachment to check things out. Their report backed up the trapper's story. The village was empty, and it seemed that the 2,000 Inuit residents had vanished without a trace. The villagers had left behind some strange things too. Sled dogs had been left behind to starve to death, and even rifles had been left behind. Things you just wouldn't abandon. The official line from the Mounties was that the Inuit probably just up and left due to some kind of panic or mass migration, but the sheer abruptness of it all makes for a pretty eerie mystery. I mean, like, why leave your gear and your dogs behind? At our number 9 spot is the Yuba County 5. This all went down in February of 1978 in California, and it's a pretty baffling story. So 5 men, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, and Gary Matthias set out for a college basketball game in a 68 Mercury Montego. Each had varying degrees of intellectual disability or psychiatric conditions. Now, after the game, they went missing. The car was later found stuck in the snow in the Plumas National Forest, but the guys were nowhere to be seen, and then months later, 4 of them turned up, dead in the wilderness. They died from exposure, and it seemed like they struggled to survive. They were found in an abandoned trailer with some clothing taken from another trailer nearby. But Gary Matthias was never found. No trace. It's like the guy just vanished into thin air. The whole case was obviously pretty strange. Why leave the car, and why head into the snowy woods in the first place? Nothing added up. The case remains a complete mystery to this day. And at number 8, we have the Flight 19 incident. So Flight 19 was a squadron of 5 US Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th, 1945, during routine training flight. So the squadron departed from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida on a navigation exercise known as Navigation Problem 1. The flight was led by experienced pilot Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor and was scheduled to fly eastward for a certain distance, then turn north and finally west back to base. Shortly into the exercise, Taylor reported that his compass was malfunctioning, leading him to believe that the squadron had flown off course. Flight 19 continued to fly in various directions, and the situation became increasingly challenging for both the pilots and ground control. As fuel levels started to drop, Taylor eventually instructed the pilots to ditch their aircraft in the ocean once they realized they could not find land. The last radio transmission from Flight 19 occurred around 6:20 p.m., indicating that the pilots were preparing to abandon their planes. No distress signals or emergency calls were received after that point. An even stranger flying boat was sent out in search of the missing pilots, and that aircraft went missing as well as all 13 crew on board. No wreckage or traces of Flight 19 or the search and rescue crew were ever found. Number 7, Roanoke Colony. In 1587, a group of about 115 settlers established the Roanoke Colony, led by John White. Soon after, White left the island to return to England for supplies and more assistance. He made it back to the island by 1590, expecting to be greeted by the settlers, but astonishingly, there was nobody there. The entire colony had seemingly vanished without a trace. There were no dead bodies and virtually no clues as to where they could have gone, aside from the words Croatoan carved into a post and Crow on a nearby tree. One theory suggests that the settlers may have relocated to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, as indicated by the carvings. They also may have attempted to escape the island by sea and got lost. Another possibility is that they integrated with the native population. There have been numerous speculations over the centuries, but the fate of the Roanoke colony is one of American history's greatest mysteries to this day. Next up on the list, we had the Flannan Isles lighthouse incident. Lighthouses have a certain vibe about them, don't they? They've always been the perfect setting for a ghost tale. Well, this next lighthouse story is a real-life documented incident, one of the strangest cases of mysterious mass vanishings in history. On December 15th, 1900, a ship noticed that the Flannan Isles lighthouse on the west coast of Scotland didn't seem to be operating. This information reached a relief vessel, which arrived on the 26th. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, the keepers, were nowhere to be found. The beds were unmade, the clock had stopped, and a set of outdoor oilskins were missing. The island's log revealed some strange entries in the days leading to their disappearance. On December 12th, Thomas Marshall noted severe winds, but nothing too out of the ordinary. But he mentioned that James Ducat, the second keeper, had been quiet, and Donald MacArthur, the third keeper, was crying. The relief keeper reported that the lighthouse's equipment and lamps were in working order. It was as if the keepers had simply vanished into thin air. And at number 5, we have the case of the Sodder family. In the rugged hills of West Virginia, the Sodder family lived a simple life. George and Jenny Sodder, 2 Italian immigrants, were building a life with their 9 children. But fate had a cruel twist in store for them on Christmas Eve of 1945. Fire erupted in the home. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their children, managed to escape the inferno. But where were the other 5? Days turned into weeks, and the Sodders clung to hope. They believed that they were still alive because there were no bodies to be found. The authorities were quick to chalk the tragedy up to an electrical mishap, claiming the fire started inside the house, but George and Jenny just weren't buying it. They knew the house had been recently rewired and inspected. George had been unafraid to voice his disdain for the fascist government of Italy at the time, and believed the fire may have had ties to the Sicilian mafia. He thought his outspokenness had drawn their attention. The vanishing of the MV Joyita crew. The MV Joyita was a merchant vessel, and on October 3rd of 1955, it left Samoa for the Takalu Islands. But when it failed to reach its destination, folks got worried. The trek was only supposed to take 48 hours. On November 10th, the Joyita was found adrift about 600 miles off course. The ship was in bad shape too, was partially submerged, and there was no sign of the 25 people who should have been on board. Lifeboats were missing, and there were indications of a struggle, with bloodstains in a doctor's bag that had been tossed around. The Joyita was meant to stay afloat even if flooded, but it was almost underwater. But it didn't sink, and it was towed back to port. But nobody ever found the crew. No bodies, no survivors, no trace. The missing crew of the Mary Celeste. So it all started back in 1872 when the Mary Celeste set sail from New York, commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs. On board were his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. Everything seemed normal as the ship sailed into the vast Atlantic Ocean. Fast forward to December 4th of that same year. A passing ship, the Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste, and something was off. The ship was just floating there, no crew in sight. They boarded the Celeste to take a look around, and not a soul on deck, not a person in the rigging. It was like they vanished into thin air. Complete silence on the open sea. The ship wasn't in shambles either. The cargo was intact, and there was no damage to the vessel. Almost everything was intact though. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. But no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, just an empty ship drifting in the vastness of the ocean. The ship's log offered no clues either. The last entry was like any other day at sea. No hints of trouble, no distress signals. It was as if the crew just decided to abandon the ship for no apparent reason. Number 2, Flight 370. On March 8th of 2014, a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The night was dark, the skies clear, but little did anyone know this would be no normal flight. As the Boeing 777 soared over the South China Sea, communication suddenly went silent. The plane vanished from radar, leaving air traffic controllers in complete shock and confusion. The plane had seemingly gone off the grid without a trace. Search and rescue teams searched the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, but the plane, along with 239 souls on board, seemed to have slipped into another dimension. The theory is that the incident was caused by mechanical failure, or, most likely, deliberate actions by the pilot. The aircraft had changed course and flew off the radar. No distress signal, no explanation. As months turned into years, there were only unanswered questions. Some said it was a hijacking, others claimed a government cover-up, but to this day, the mystery has never been solved. And finally, we have Bermeja. So we've talked about groups of people who have gone missing, flights that have gone missing, entire crews of ships, but how about an entire island just off the map? Bermeja was marked on maps, including those by the Mexican government, as a small island in the Gulf of Mexico. But when authorities tried to locate it in the 20th century, it seemed to have disappeared. In the 1920s and 30s, the Mexican government conducted maritime surveys, and Bermeja was part of the maps. Yet, when the government needed to confirm its coordinates for a maritime boundary agreement with the United States in the 70s, several expeditions were sent out to locate the island, but it was nowhere to be found. There are some interesting theories for this one, ranging from geological changes to cartographic errors. There's also a theory that it was intentionally removed or altered on maps for political reasons. But regardless, the fact remains that Bermeja, which had been marked on maps for centuries, seemingly vanished without any clear explanation.
Lemuria, a lost civilization said to have had an all-out war with none other than the lost city of Atlantis.
Where did the legend of Lemuria come from, and is there any truth to it?
The concept of the lost continent of Lemuria was first introduced to the world in 1864 by a man named Philip Sclater, a lawyer and zoologist who divided the world into 6 main zoogeographic regions based on the distribution of animal species. These regions were the Palearctic, Ethiopian, Australasian, Nearctic, and the Neotropical regions, which was all good and well until Sclater noticed something strange. Lemur fossils in India, as well as Madagascar, but not in nearby Africa or the Middle East. Seeing as identical species don't develop in 2 different places at once and lemurs can't swim, Philip theorized that the lemurs must have found their way to their various homes some other way, perhaps a large landmass or land bridge connecting Madagascar to India before eventually becoming swallowed by the seas, a landmass he later decided to name Lemuria in honor of the animals that sparked it in the first place.
So there's actually an entire school dedicated to the existence of Lemuria and what is referred to as the Lemurian philosophy. The school is found on this piece of land near Ramona, California, and is called the Lemurian Lemurian Fellowship. I checked out the website, and there are some aspects to the lessons that are a bit more esoteric and seemingly inapplicable in real life. You know, teaching about reincarnation. One lesson called the New Order, quote, takes the student into the future some 800 years after Armageddon for a privileged visit to 3 great cities of the forthcoming civilization. Whatever that means. Guess I gotta do the full course. But the course also does outline things that are gonna be more relevant in your day-to-day life, like finances. There's a lesson devoted to marriage and family, health. This course really does cover the full gamut. Now, my first thought was that the place was gonna be a scam, but the price, it's actually pretty reasonable. $50 enrollment fee, and then $35 per lesson. There's 12 in total. Like, hey, you know what? A lot of scumbags online that offer their corrupt, get-rich-quick courses are charging just mountains more than that. So, the Lemurian Fellowship may be a little odd, but they don't seem like they're like in it to swindle people to me. And there's nothing on the site about divorcing yourself from your family or friends, and you can even do the course online. So, not getting any super in-your-face culty vibes either. This sounds like an ad for the website. I'm not saying it is. I just find this kind of interesting.
In 1888, Helena Blavatsky, a Russian-American author, released a book called The Secret Doctrine, which questioned whether or not Lemuria was actually the birthplace of all humanity rather than Africa, and she put forth the idea that all major religions are united by an ancient wisdom that stemmed from an original root race in a sequence of 7 root races that define the various and concrete stages of human development. The first was the Polarian race, ethereal beings with no physical bodies. The second, the Hyperborean race, shapeless asexuals that produced through natural cloning. The third race in the sequence was the Lemurian race, who lived alongside the dinosaurs and were intelligent giants with yellowish brown skin, flattened faces, small piercing eyes, and incredibly long arms and legs. The fourth race was the Atlanteans, the inhabitants of Atlantis, peak physical structure and incredibly advanced intelligence. We are the fifth race, the expansion race, spreading out across the globe. It is Blavatsky's belief that Lemuria was destroyed by fire. Volcanoes shattered the continent into small islands, including the Hawaiian Islands, and the rest of the lands slowly sank down into the sea.
Alright, so after finishing the Lemurian Fellowship course, you may be qualified to join the Lemurian Order, the headquarters of which are also located near Ramona, California, on a piece of 200-acre property referred to as the Gateway. Enticing. The Lemurian Fellowship, the Lemurian Order, the Gateway, this all sounds very high fantasy. So what do you do once you're part of the Order? Do you seek out ancient manuscripts and battle-toad people in the woods? Based on these names, I have very high hopes. Now, from most of what I read though, the Lemurian Order specializes in crafts. Aircraft? Are they making advanced aircraft based on ancient scientific knowledge from the lost civilization of Lemuria? Well, no. By crafts, they mean like music stands. They do cabinets, wooden beakers. They make a lot of stuff out of wood. Lamps are also on the list. It's, you know, it's handcrafted. That's why they're called crafts, I guess. So not quite as epic as what I was hoping for, but everyone does like handcrafted stuff. You don't get a lot of that these days.
James Churchward, a British writer and inventor, also had an incredible interest in the forgotten continent of Lemuria. But after translating a number of ancient Indian tablets, he came to the conclusion that the landmass had actually once been referred to as Mu. In 1931, Churchward published his fourth book, The Children of Mu. In it, he described Lemuria as having a population of about 60 million people, and he claimed that the continent stretched all the way from Hawaii in the north to Easter Island in the east and almost all the way up to Japan in the west. In fact, later in life, Churchward stated a belief that the Sunken Yonagani monument, which we have mentioned before on this channel, might have actually been part of ancient Lemuria, and that the Nan Madol in Micronesia, which we have also mentioned before, might have been part of southern Lemuria as well. Furthermore, Churchward believed Easter Island to have been part of the landmass due to the fact that in ancient times it was home to 12,000 people, and it's highly unlikely that they would have been able to make that journey via canoe. It makes much more sense to Churchward, and starting to make much more sense to myself, and believers of Lemuria, that the inhabitants of Easter Island simply walked there instead. If they were Lemurians and therefore giants that would also explain how they would have created the famous Easter Island megastructures. Unlike Sclater and Blavatsky though, Churchward does not believe the continent slowly sank, but rather disappeared in a single night when earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis triggered by a pole shift swallowed Lemuria whole in just a matter of hours.
So much like Helena Blavatsky talked about with the Lemurians living alongside dinosaurs, some do go as far to say that the Lemurians were full-on reptilian beings. As for their origin, one idea is that they came from another planet and settled on Earth, establishing the great civilization of Lemuria. These reptilians are said to have lived peacefully on this part of the land for thousands of years, building a highly advanced society, and when Lemuria was destroyed, more on that later, these reptilian beings didn't just disappear, instead they went underground, both literally and figuratively. Some conspiracy theorists even claim these reptilians dug deep into the earth, creating hidden cities and tunnels to continue their existence away from human eyes.
Going off of Helena Blavatsky's point about how all major religions are united by one ancient wisdom, American authors James Bramwell and William Scott Elliott both believe that the event that destroyed Lemuria greatly mirrored the Great Flood as is described in the Bible. But rather than the flood taking place in 2348 BC, they believe it took place roughly 11,600 years ago during the Younger Dryas, at the end of the last ice age, when Earth's climate began to shift, and the planet went from being cold, frigid, and completely glacial to a little bit warmer and more interglacial. During this time, ice sheets were melting rapidly, and sea levels were rising at alarming rates across the globe. Coastal areas were completely wiped out, and entire land masses, including Lemuria, were almost completely submerged underwater.
So Lemuria is often compared to Atlantis, but as you'll learn more about in a minute, there's said to be a connection between the two, a connection that turned out to lead to their eventual downfall. But before we get to that, let's talk about Bimini Road, an underwater rock formation that some say may be the remnants of a lost ancient civilization like Atlantis or Lemuria. It was discovered in 1968, but a few decades before, it was mentioned by an American mystic named Edgar Cayce, who wrote about how a road leading to Atlantis would be discovered in the years to come, writing that, quote, "A portion of the temples may yet be discovered under the slime of ages and seawater near Bimini. Expect it in 68 or 69. Yeah, that's actually pretty wild.
So by now we've heard quite a few theories lending reasoning to why Lemuria might have disappeared so many years ago, but there is one that we have not touched upon yet, and it is my personal favorite. Why? Well, because it includes the people of Atlantis, the humanoid godlike alien race of the Anunnaki, who, according to legend, created humans through DNA manipulation and then used them as slaves in a great war between them two and the Lemurians. According to Daniel W. Fry, Atlanteans lived peacefully for almost 200,000 years before the Anunnaki came to Earth and began influencing and corrupting their society. It was this corruption that led Atlanteans to the conclusion that it was their destiny to dominate and rule over all other existing tribes and communities on Earth. But they couldn't do it without the help of the Lemurians. Only problem was, the Lemurians didn't agree with this way of living, as they believed societies deserved the opportunity to thrive on their own. Because of this, a war broke out between the Atlanteans and the Lemurians sometime between 1004 and 9500 BC. The war was cataclysmic, and the amount of nuclear energy used in the battle caused the Earth to become unstable. The axis began to change and the Earth began to shift. At the end of the Great Battle, both civilizations had fallen and their lands had become lost to the seas. According to some, there were some survivors, Lemurian survivors, who went on to create a secret civilization that apparently still exists today in the mountains of California.
That's right, Hannah. If you want to witness the sights and sounds of the majestic ancient civilization of Lemuria yourself, you may want to travel to Mount Shasta, where there's said to be a hidden underground city. According to the legend, this subterranean world is home to the remnants of Lemuria, who took refuge there after their epic war with Atlantis. There have also been a bunch of UFO sightings around Mount Shasta, and some folks even claim to have encountered this underground city. One of the most famous stories comes from a prospector prospector named J.C. Brown. So in 1904, while searching for gold, he stumbled on a cave that sloped down for 11 miles. And inside, he claimed to have found what looked like an entire city filled with artifacts like shields and weapons and the mummified remains of large humanoids, some towering at 10 feet tall. J.C. Brown kept his discovery a secret for years until he finally shared his story with a guy named John C. Root. John got a team together to search for this underground city, but on the day they were supposed to meet, J.C. Brown vanished without a trace and was never seen or heard from again.